All right. Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar on OT and IT security, hosted by BeyondTrust and KeyData. We're delighted to have you join us as we explore the critical intersection of information technology and operational technology security, a topic that's front and center for organizations navigating an evolving threat landscape. My name is Peter Boys. I'm country leader for solutions engineering here at BeyondTrust. And with me, I've got Shurouq and Paul. Shurouq, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Peter. My name is Shurouq Hijazi. I'm Managing Director at KeyData, and I've been in the identity space for over a decade. So I have advised clients across the industry on how to operationalize and build their identity security programs, including privileged access management, to support both their IT and OT needs. And I'm looking forward to having our conversation today about securing critical infrastructure. Paul?
Thank you, Shurouq, and thanks, Peter, for having me. Paul Da Silva, I've been, on the identity space as well for at least a decade, coming from the vendor side as well on the partner side, on the client side, IT and OT background, electrical, oil and gas actually as well. But more likely right now, currently holding a role as a solutions architect covering BeyondTrust broad solutions in IT and OT. More than welcome to go through all the use cases we have for you today.
Awesome. So I'm really just going to be moderating today's webinar. And so I'm going to ask questions of both Shurouq and Paul, and then some questions I'm going to ask both of them. So Shurouq, the first question I've got for you is, how should organizations rethink their onboarding and offboarding processes for contractors, vendors, and remote workers who are accessing OT systems?
Sorry, I went on mute for some reason. Thank you, Peter. For me, I believe identity has to cross multiple boundaries, right? So onboarding and offboarding is one piece of it. When we think about securing access, offboarding typically gets the priority because you want to make sure you're cutting off the access that a terminated employee has across not only the things that are quick and domain joined, but also any local accounts. And I think that's the bigger struggle in OT. So having strong offboarding process is critical. I won't dismiss onboarding as well from a security standpoint, ensuring that you're following least privilege principles and you're only granting access to the assets that an employee needs. And one of the, I would say, pitfalls we typically see in OT systems, because there's a heavy reliance on local credentials, is you might set the same password inadvertently across multiple assets or leave default passwords. And that way, when an employee is onboarded and gets access to one credential, they're, by virtue of doing that, getting access to a whole lot of other systems as well. So having that strong onboarding and offboarding processes through preferably centralized controls and systems is going to be critical to securing organizations. The other piece is monitoring. Once you get access, that continuous process of ideally having a user going through a PAM solution to monitor the remote sessions that they may have to access an application or server. That way you have accountability established and a very audit like forensics trail for the future and for logging. Last one I want to mention that could potentially be long-term goal that would be excellent for organizations when they're rethinking their identity and privileged access processes is just-in-time access. And I say long-term because that's the holy grail, but it's really hard to implement without having out-of-the-box connectors. But sometimes if you build custom connectors or you set some processes to get around it, you are able to provide, to get rid of standing access and provide just in time temporary access to systems. And once the task is completed, you're removing that. So you're reducing the risk of dormant accounts being exploited.
Awesome. So Paul, we've seen in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, we've seen this explosion of Internet of Things sensors, autonomous robots, and predictive maintenance platforms. Machine-to-machine communication is now dominant in OT. How should IAM evolve to govern these non-human identities in OT, and what risks do we face if these machine identities are unmanaged?
Yeah, it's a very good point, Peter. And the best example is taking projects that I hit in the past. And you're going to see more and more right now a lot of those enterprise doing a shift into edge computings, using from sensors to even cameras, and they're all connected and using cloud. So every single device right now is literally using credentials. Basically, if we looked in the past, they typically used default passwords and shared keys and so on, up until you realize that once you get compromised into one little sensor, basically all your cluster are basically at risk. So basically, to fix that main issue is avoid the use of unique credentials and start using key rotation and least privilege between devices. Basically, in OT right now, you need to think as machines are literally an identity. And they outnumber users. You have more machines than users. So you have to basically unmanage, and then attackers can move freely across the edge. So you need to basically use identity for every single unmanaged device. So every sensor and gateway is literally one identity, and you need to treat them really like users. That's my key goal into this.
Very good. So this question is going to be for both of you. I'm going to start with Shurouq, though. So many OT engineers, like other parts of IT, resist cybersecurity controls that may impact uptime. How can organizations build a culture of security without alienating the operations teams?
Yeah, I love that question because it takes away for the discussion from just pure technical to the more like governance piece of it, which I find often missed in security. I think building that culture of trust is the way to start, and you have to show security is an add-on that won't disrupt operations. It has to be shown as a business enabler. And really the key would be to start with small, quick wins. It's hard to get folks on board with large projects that are, overhaul their operations. It's starting with the low-hanging fruit. So I always ask my clients to look at two things: risk reduction as well as effort. If something is going to give you the most risk reduction with the least amount of effort, those are low-hanging fruits, quick wins that we can start with to build momentum. Once a small group sees another group that was able to get one piece of the project done successfully, then they start, opening up, and then you start building that trust and showing the team that security is an enabler or is an add-on that won't really disrupt your operations, and most importantly, your uptime. I think going into conversations and acknowledging, like simply saying, hey, I know this solution may change your process, but we know uptime is important to you, and we will make sure we give you break glass. We give you ways to ensure availability, because I often see availability and uptime being of the most importance to OT practitioners. So acknowledging risks ahead of time, letting them know, hey, here is our fallback plan if it goes south, and just building those quick wins in a gradual fashion to slowly build trust. that's how you start seeing that the results or reap the fruits and build a culture where security and operations teams are working hand in hand.
Yeah, I think Shurouq, you have an amazing segue into my speech here, but it's uptime. Uptime is king basically in OT. And what I've seen in the past is on projects is that when you do a PAM deployment, there's a lots of reluctance on the OT side. They try to bypass sometimes the solution in place. So they will continue using either RDP on the side or VNC and Telnet, and basically bypassing proxies and bypassing structures. And a lot of the times it's because either the solution's not fully implemented, or there's no ways to move around. But basically the turning point comes when companies start creating this joint task force between cyber and OT. And basically, engineers starts explaining the downtime. What's the most painful, and security basically starting tailoring controls and adjusting maintenance window and access solutions that basically won't slow response time. Once we have that balance, there's a little bit more. They kind of everybody starts working in the same through the same bandwagon, and you have OT engineers start reporting anomalies and being involved in the project. So there's the big basically takeaways that on the OT side, security can't really be bolt on. It has to be co-designed, in between operations and cyber, and there's a culture that needs to be created, where basically uptime, so that is very important, like Shurouq was saying, and security both work together, and there you have the win. So basically, I keep on saying it, in OT, uptime is king, but the smartest security leader learn to protect it and not compete against it, type of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point there. And, one of the things that I enjoy about all of these things is, really taking those real world examples and then applying this. So, Shurouq, if you could follow up, and what are some of the biggest challenges that critical infrastructure providers face when applying IAM and PAM principles to OT environments as compared to the IT environments where we traditionally see those things?
Yeah, there are several challenges we see every day, I would say, but the biggest I often encounter is the fact that the design of some of these systems is just simply not identity centric. I think in IT, we take things like Active Directory and MFA for granted. But in OT, you'll often find legacy PLCs and systems that just don't support modern authentication, or that still, rely on local credentials, or require a lot of customizations to be able to connect to. And that's why we see a lot of clients fall back to just local credential that they keep and copy across multiple systems, which is a huge security no-no. But with the right tools and the right discovery processes, you start to unpack those and try to work with the solution as opposed to against it. The second I see often is third-party access. I think the nature of critical infrastructure lends itself to requiring a lot of contractors, in particularly on the field. Like one of the prime like examples or real life scenarios that we run into is, okay, this is a great solution that you're offering, but then I have people on the ground, on the field, who will require these credentials and have zero access to the internet. So you coming in with a SaaS or another solution that requires any sort of network access is going to be a challenge. So how do we provide and accommodate these offline access requests and ensure that we're securing not only the employees, but also all these contractors and vendors that support the operations on day-to-day basis, and sometimes remotely as well. Like the field is one case, and then the third-party remote access is another. Those would be the key ones that I run into from an identity security standpoint. But if you ask like folks in OT and on the operations side, I think you'll hear what Paul was saying, uptime is king. That is a big challenge. Having availability is to this day the number one challenge that folks are trying to make sure we're not disrupting, because a production line, like especially in oil and gas, imagine if we're messing with one thing that is going to stop a production line, that's millions of dollars at stake. Or in utilities, power off for millions of users if one update or one credential gets rotated and stops an underlying service. So I don't want to minimize that operational risk. It's important to call that out, along with the other governance related risks and challenges, primarily the skills gap. When I talk to colleagues and clients in the OT sector, it's really hard to find folks who have a lot of experience specifically in OT. A lot of IT skilled resources are there who can be trained across, but it's really hard to find someone with that proper skill set, especially in the identity space, because in the past, identity and privileged access management have been mostly on the IT side. So having someone who come from that background but is also experienced in OT, it is almost like a unicorn, to be honest. So having that addressed as we talk more and more about OT and addressing that skill gap is going to be key for our future success.
Very good. So, as we kind of think about kind of operationalizing this, so Paul, when we talk to organizations that are talking about enforcing least privilege and you're wanting to track machine identities and extend, PAM controls, you obviously have to think about, not overwhelming operators. How should we kind of enforce this without introducing new failure modes?
Yeah, Peter, that's a good one. There's a couple takeaways into this, and kind of reverts back what Shurouq was saying initially as well. It's basically the ability to enforce least privilege without friction, right? So either creating role-based access profiles, and in OT, when I say role-based access profiles, it's typically going to be like operators, engineers, vendors. So really profiled by job. And creating policies at the choke point. When I say policy at the choke point, it's really at the jump post. So when you have external vendors jumping into a environment, typically going to use a jump post or a jump point, and then basically enforcing least privilege right there, and then having break glass type of accounts for specific use cases where issues arise. You have tracked machine identities without sprawl. So basically having CMDBs or IDSMs basically, have a central machine identity inventory that is super important to have a knowledge of, of what you have, a posture of the environment. Extend PAM controls as well. Sharing all those share accounts needs to be vaulted. And with obviously rotation. Protocol aware proxy is a good one. You're gonna see this more and more as well. So basically, when we're talking about jump points with proxies, at that jump point, and basically having that role base applied to the jump host, and they're protocol aware, so they can leverage OT protocols like Modbus, MQTT, etc. And avoid failures, right? So having high availability on the PAM side, from third-party software that grants that ability for external users to come in, full availability as well. So basically having full redundancy on the environment are key goals to have that deployed.
Very good. So sure. If you mentioned earlier around there's a lot of maturity in IT, but in OT we kind of have these kind of legacy pieces, shared vendor access, local operator logins. That's still a reality in a lot of OT environments. So what's a realistic roadmap for, deploying PAM and OT? And do we still need a fundamentally different PAM model for those accounts for protocols like Paul mentioned around Modbus and DNP3 or OPC UA? Like, kind of talk us through that, and I'll start with Shurouq, and then Paul, if you've got anything to add to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think a lot of similarities exist between the two, and we're building a roadmap for identity security on the IT and OT side, because they typically both start with inventory. You can't really protect what you can't see. So the one thing I typically start with is inventory and prioritization, ensuring that we understand what's our privileged account footprint out there, because that's usually our highest risk from an identity standpoint. And that could be human as well as machine, especially in, I think the difference here is in OT, the tools you're using to start that inventory is slightly different, because you're focused more on machine and services, and especially in OT systems. Once we have an understanding of what's out there, then we start building some of the governance. And it can start with basic things like defining accountability, ownership of who got the onus on protecting the shared accounts, because a lot of these, especially machine identities, potentially used by systems that are leveraged across different teams or multiple people. So how do we ensure there is a single one accountable person that owns the account, and that can go a long way, because then that person knows they're on the hook for ensuring that that credential is maintained, rotated based on the policy, etc. Then once we have established that governance, then you start introducing some of these technology controls. And it can be starting with the basics of vaulting credentials and brokering remote sessions. We talked earlier about the advent of having some brokering, like a PAM solution broker for remote sessions, and BeyondTrust does a fantastic job at that to do video recording of access, so that you're maintaining not only visibility but also control. If something is suspicious, you can kill the session right away and detect it, and as well as prevent lateral movement from that standpoint. The other controls we can think of in OT can get a little bit more granular in terms of supporting like its authentication for like DNP3 sessions or Modbus, etc. So these are the different where you start seeing IT and OT a little bit diverge. But in the implementation, once you have supported these connectors and platforms, you're able to establish consistent and standardized controls across both IT and OT. That's the beauty of it, to have that centralized, at least standards or controls across the two, and be able to provide reporting. The last piece I'll talk about here is the analytics and reporting side of it, because you want to show KPIs and have progress from a program build perspective, because oftentimes we get so hung up on the details and the implementations and get into the weeds of it that we lose track of how can we look at the bigger picture of a program maturity and provide meaningful metrics to leadership, so we can show gradual progress. And when you have those, unless you define those metrics, the reporting and analytics of the tools are going to be meaningless. So you want to make sure you're defining what's important, so that you're tracking it as your program grows, and you're able to show at least the progress you've built so far.
Very good.
Thanks, Shurouq.
Paul?
On that, so because PAM has been on the IT space for a long many years, and they're a little shift now towards DOT. Basically, PAM on the OT needs to be a little bit of more of an hybrid model, different from the IT side. But I think in regards to those protocols from Modbus and Profile Bus and DNP and so on, that portions, it's important to understand those protocols and basically have the ability to decrypt the protocols and understand when there's a shift on the protocols. And I think there's tools right now in the market that have great ability to do that. From Dragos to Nozomis and other players. And I think there's a nice integration between those two. So the PAM space or the third-party space or PRA kind of space that works along the Dragos and the Nozomis of this world, where we understand identity and they understand protocols, and there's a beautiful path between both. And again, on regards to a nice roadmap, and I think Shurouq touched that as well, but inventory classification is super important, and the ability to do segmentation prioritization on that. And then you have, yes, the just-in-time, the session management, and basically it's important to have that hybrid model, like I said earlier, where basically the ability to do the balance between security and the uptime, right? That balance in the OT side is important.
Very good. We just dropped a reminder in the chat, but please feel free to ask any questions, whether it's directed at maybe a statement that one of our presenters has made, or any other things that you're seeing in your environment. We want to make this as interactive and useful for everybody. So please make sure you put those in the chat, and we'll get those answered towards the end. So Shurouq, how do you see the convergence of IT and OT networks changing the way that organizations approach identity and access management? Traditionally, they've been very separate, and you touched on it earlier around IT kind of having the Active Directory and a lot of OT networks having local and other things. But how are you seeing that change today?
That's a great question, because we are seeing a little shift, small but gradual, for sure, to more holistic coverage of identity. And first, I want to clarify what we mean by like convergence, because we do still have to understand the need to do segmentation, but there's a difference between segmentation versus full segregation. So the idea here is to shift away from the traditional thinking of, oh, this is isolated, full segregation. I'm not going to worry about my IT team. I'm going to separate them and build a whole lot, another OT team. When we go through that traditional approach, we often miss a lot of the benefits, and we kind of ignore the fact that there's still connectivity of sorts. There's still pathways that you may go from securely, obviously, from one environment to another. But I think the shift is for these secure interconnections to be based on the identity, and making sure that when we say identity, it's like the access tracking, who has access to what, and once they're in, what are they, what have they completed, and that's what we're seeing in the most recent updates of NERC SIP, and we see that now controls requirements on making sure for like BES system, electrical systems to have logs, detailed trail of who accessed what, as opposed to the traditional just firewalls and network segmentation. I mean, that's still important, but we're seeing that identity accountability shift, and questions that leadership teams are asking for who accessed these systems, and what did they do, when did they access, why did they access it, et cetera, to maintain compliance. And just looking at the industry, we're now even seeing small shifts in the way ownership is taking place. So in the past, we saw a lot of like CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, but I actually was reading an article just this past weekend about the shift to CSO, Chief Security Officer, because there's that realization that there should be central accountability for both information security or IT, as well as physical security, and that's incredibly important for critical infrastructure environments. And even in RFPs, like a few weeks back, I responded to an RFP that required a PAM solution for both IT and OT. Like they made it clear in the RFP that in our long-term plan, we're planning to leverage this to protect some of our OT assets and ask some really intelligent questions about how is that possible? What are some of the caveats we need to account for when we're building a PAM program? And that's a lot of it is telling, because it shows that people are starting to recognize that whatever they're doing in IT, because in the past PAM programs and IAM programs were sitting with a different team. Now we're seeing, oh, it's under central accountability, and the same team is concerned about both. So definitely seeing a shift in the industry.
Just as a
if I can
follow-up on
add,
that one. Yeah, sorry.
yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
can
Paul.
add a bit on it. So one thing, and you, I'm sure a lot of our clients are seeing it too, is that right now there's a big shift towards the edge. So I talked a little bit earlier about it, but basically you can have sensors, even on electrical, you can have sensors monitor electrical lines, and they're sending data towards the cloud, and that cloud could be AWS, Azure, whatever the case may be. But we're breaking that Purdue model, where typically it was completely, air gap completely from the internet. And right now you have basically devices sending data to the cloud, and we need to have protection and controls over it. But we need to find ways to basically, and you've seen that right now the Purdue model is shifting as well. I was reading as well a topic about a year ago, where there's a new Purdue model diagram where it's actually taking into consideration the edge and basically creating VPCs and controls on the edge side to still have that knowledge of air gapness, if you will, towards the devices that are still reaching cloud for analytics and for dumping data and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's important to have regulations and controls, even though we're breaking the Purdue or OT traditional legacy model.
So whoever had 35 minutes into the call for the first mention of the Purdue model on your bingo card, you get a prize. So Paul, I'm going to follow up with a question for you. So how are jump points evolving into policy enforcement points that simulate micro-segmentation in what would otherwise be a flat network in OT, which effectively turns identity into the new perimeter?
Yeah, that comes around often lately, and the reality is that a lot of those OT networks are flat, and there's a cost. There's a cost to having from firewalls to routers and switches and create just the ability to create different VLANs on a flat network from OT, small nodes or branches or it's complicated, and it's a project on its own. And yes, I talked earlier about the ability to do choke points at the jump point or at the jump post, and basically use identity as kind of the new perimeter, and creating those that segregation, instead of relying on network to create the segregation, relying on identity to create the segregation and create that choke point. So if you have external users that need to come in, if they're obviously contractors that are outside and they want to jump into the environment, and you want to segregate what they have access to, you can use identity to accomplish this. And you can do the same even though you're internally. So even if you're internal, and you have, like I said initially, you have specific roles. So if you're an engineer, operator, so on and so forth, you can create specific roles and specific access based on that specific role. So basically have that contextual controls. And you can do as well, you have the notion of doing per session certificates and tokens. So create short-lived certificate for accesses into specific devices. Could be databases, could be as well PLCs or HMIs, depending. So basically creating that specific short-lived for that specific amount of time. So again, into that notion of just-in-time and least privilege altogether, and creating again protocol controls. So inline proxies that extends the jump point into that protocol aware of jump points. So basically, that jump point needs to know some protocols from RDP, SSH, VNCs, and again creating that access based on the protocol and who has access to what. And then you can integrate with obviously your typical SIMs to have visibility, UABA tools, so on and so forth, but basically creating the visibility into every single access. And I think Shurouq mentioned as well earlier about the fact that BeyondTrust, and I would say most of the companies on the PAM space grant you the ability to record sessions. So basically, even if you have somebody that jumps into the environment, you have full control on what's going on from a recording perspective, but as well from a key log on the tool itself. And then obviously you can offboard and send it to your SIM tools and your analytics tools of this world, from Elasticsearch to so on.
Very good. So if we've turned identity into the new perimeter, one would think that we would need to then secure that. So, how does identity security help meet compliance requirements such as, previously mentioned NERC CIP? And I'll do that for Shurouq first.
Sure, yeah. We see that question come up often, especially for our utilities client. And for those who aren't familiar with NERC, it's essentially the North America electric compliance or information protection standards. The idea for these standards is to really, at the core of it, protect access to BES or bulk electric systems. And we're seeing that shift from just having network control standards to identity-centric control standards. And for example, you can, to your question on how does identity security solutions help meet compliance, there's a lot of requirements around securing access as part of onboarding and offboarding. So that's a classic use case for an identity governance solution that can securely track what users' accounts are out there and what they have access to, and automate that process so that when they leave, you're not left wondering what the user has access to still, and you make sure there isn't any lingering or orphaned accounts out there. So that's one way to meet compliance. PAM solutions will also meet compliance on the monitoring side of it. Many of the controls demand having it's not prescriptive. You don't have to have video recording per se, but if you look at the standards of all the logs and the evidence required to prove who got access to what at what time, what they did there, what better way to show compliance of what someone did than to have a video recording of it. That's as granular as it gets. And you don't have to do it for every system, but certainly for like super critical ones that are in particular of interest to the leadership team to prove that there was proper configuration change management and meeting those assessment type of standards. Another advantage or way to prove compliance with PAM solutions like BeyondTrust is simply enforcing password policies. So there are some NERC standards around how we should treat credentials, and the way you can configure PAM solutions that have full control of privileged passwords is to prescribe, here's the minimum complexity or length and whatnot. And we're moving kind of away from complexity and more towards length, but at least in automating that password management piece guarantees me that whatever policy the organization has set will be enforced on these credentials. So there are various ways to meet compliance with the requirements, but those are just a few highlights.
Yeah, for me, NERC can be sometimes painful, but it's a nice framework, and the way I see this is that it's built around accountability. So accountability is what NERC is built for auditors. So accountability is what auditors are looking for. And the way I kind of swing this is identity is accountability. And on the PAM space, we are identity. We understand identity, and basically that's what we deliver. We have to give them that visibility into identity. So from enforcing that least privilege or role based, providing the strong authentication from MFA, certs, and so on, and then centralizing. I think you touched that point, centralizing the audit trails, right, for human and for machines into your different tools. And then have governance vendors and that remote access knowledge when you have external people coming in. So that's for me the important piece is, again, identity is the new perimeter. It falls back to this, and it hits a good point in regards to NERC, because that's exactly what they're looking for.
Very good. All right, so we're going to move over into kind of audience submitted questions, and let's keep those coming. We've still got a couple minutes left, but whoever wants to answer this one, what real world examples or case studies have you seen where that identity first approach prevented or minimized disruption in OT, which is obviously, uptime is king, as we've talked about, several times. So how can we prevent or minimize disruption based off of that?
Yes, I could start.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Shurouq.
Sure. I mean, there are multiple examples, but one that kind of go first in mind is a reminder of the simplest approaches being sometimes the most effective. I kind of smile whenever I remember this example, but in one of our clients in the transportation sector, all they did was conduct a cleanup exercise. They just wanted to start with the most basics. Let's clean up our passwords, especially since they were aware that there are some shared accounts, and make sure that there is to Paul's point earlier on accountability, there's an owner for each of these accounts, and the idea was to make sure each of the owners would confirm that they have rotated the credentials during their down time window so that it doesn't disrupt operations. And they would also confirm that this password is unique and meets the policies and is not shared across the board, and acknowledges that they're aware of who has access to that credential. Simple, basic governance. During that time, it just happened that one of the employees got let go, and it was one of these, in tough situations where they weren't sure if that disgruntled employee would retaliate, and they, because it's an OT, they had access to some local credentials. So there was that fear, oh, what access do they have to? But thanks to that simple, basic, exercise that was just completed at that time, they were able to quickly at least understand what credentials that employee would have access to, and make sure that within a quick 24 hours, there was no residual access left, and that the blast radius was much more contained because of that. So it's maybe not the most ideal case study of what could happen, because there's a lot more advanced you can go, but it was just such a nice reminder that sometimes the most basic controls can get you a long way and stop disruptions.
I have
80-20, right? 80-20 rule. You
Yeah,
can hit a lot
exactly.
with a very little. Paul?
Oh, go ahead, Peter.
No, go ahead.
No, I have a super quick example. It's basically if you look at machines, if they're not using, if they're still using single passwords and so on. Nowadays, you can use certificate-based trust. So device could basically authenticate automatically. So the onboarding could be super quick and secure, and then you can do rotations of those certificate-based trusts. So basically, that concept, that idea, makes it super easy to have identity first control your stack in the environment.
Very
I
good.
love that example.
Simple is very good. So this one would be for, we have organizations that are just starting their IT, OT IAM journey, what would, if you had to give just one piece of advice, what would that be to an organization that's just starting that journey? Shurouq, I'll let you go first.
Sure. I would say the top one is to start with inventory if you don't have it already. Because if you're just starting that journey, you want to understand what are you protecting and have clarity with leadership on what is the criteria for prioritization. And if that's, because as Paul said, uptime is king. Understanding, getting that list of RTOs and RPOs for various systems to understand which ones are the most critical and what their uptime requirements are. And that way you can inventory credentials and identities across these systems first. And once you have visibility, then you can assess what the problems are. You can assess what controls make sense. But you need to have that visibility to establish at least some baseline controls across what matters the most. And then when we're building a program and especially in that early stages, one of the other things we talked about earlier is the whole culture, right? How do we build trust with operators who aren't as involved in security, but they want to do the right thing. They just don't want to risk their operations and uptime. So having some sort of top-down support from messaging perspective, from change management perspective to build because that initial, when you're starting to build a program, that initial support and buy-in from various stakeholders can make it or break it for you in the long term. It can mean a program that's consistently growing, or a program that just, gets a solution, becomes a shelfware, and doesn't really help protect the organization.
Awesome. All right. I think that is the last submitted question. So I guess I'll give each of you a couple minutes if you've got any like wrap up comments or next steps that you think people should take. Shurouq, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're not alone. This is a field that has a lot of practitioners who would love to help, and don't be afraid to reach out if there are questions or resources you're looking for, like, hey, what solution can help with this, or what process should change to address certain gaps. This is part of building this webinar, and other ways we can build the community and the culture to help each other out. So yeah, my call to action would be to feel free to reach out and seek help, because you're not alone. And often a lot of folks on the call here are probably facing the same challenges.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
we're both from the vendor side and from the partner side. I think we can come together with as well, the industry and come, and obviously every single use case is different. So we can always be here to help you out. Put our minds into each different use case and build a solution that could fit and with the timelines as well that you have. And so we're both here to help from the partner side, from the vendor side. And I'm most happy to take your questions here, or obviously later on via email or phone and so on.
awesome. Well, I think that is the end of our prepared things. So I appreciate Shurouq and Paul for joining today. Appreciate everybody's time together as we kind of step through this. And like Paul mentioned, please reach out if there's anything that we can do to help you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.